Hey guys, Eric Hovind here with CreationToday.org. Welcome to another Google Hangout. This time I am in a ballroom, so I feel like I should get up and do a waltz or something, even though I would probably not do that too well. And we've got another Apologetic Hangout for you. This is week number 7. We have done 7 weeks of apologetics, and it really has been a lot of fun. It's been amazing. Landon Mosley and myself have been doing these. We've had a few guests on. If you missed it, we've covered historical apologetics and really talked about why we do apologetics, what it's all about. And apologetics, by the way, is defending the faith. All of these classes, by the way, are leading up to what we're going to be doing in the summer here in Pensacola, Florida, with a week of intensive apologetic training that you're not going to want to miss. You'll learn so much and really get a love and a respect for God and His Word and all the things through history. So we got historical apologetics, we talked about that, scientific apologetics, philosophical apologetics, legal apologetics, then cults and other religions, the problem of evil, and now this week we're talking about cultural apologetics. How does apologetics in the culture play out? So, Landon, we got a lot to talk about today, man, don't we?
We sure do. Culture is a very big and broad topic, but the Christian worldview has a lot to say about it. So it should be a pretty exciting ride.
Awesome. Well, I am here in Nashville, Tennessee at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, so trying to meet and greet people, letting people know about the Genesis 3D movie. God always gives, I just always ask God for divine appointments, and He's given that, so we're real thankful for that. If you haven't checked it out yet, genesismovie.com, a shameless plug for a great project. So you might hear noise around me and things like that, but I'm sorry, we'll try to ignore that, and if it's bad, I'll just mute my mic here. When it comes to culture apologetics, really what we're talking about is the fact that our worldview is going to be played out in culture. And really, when we try to separate the way we live with what we believe, well, we really do everybody a disservice, because what we believe determines how we behave. So it's almost, I could say it's impossible to separate these two things. But Landon's going to take us through some of the different ages and really talk about how the apologetics has been influential in the culture. Landon, where are we going to get started here?
Well, we're going to go ahead and start with the Roman age at the birth of the church, and a lot of my material is, of course, drawn from Francis Schaeffer's work on How Should We Then Live. Some of your listeners will be very familiar with a lot of this terminology and things that I'll be using. For those that plan on attending the summer course in August, I highly recommend reading that as one of the books. We posted some book readings before you attend, or we're going to be posting that. And that's one that I highly recommend, because it's going to be very informative for all of you who attend to see how we sort of address and interact with the culture. And what we really have is we have a twofold approach where we do a negative apologetic, and that is where we take what other worldviews are delivering culturally, which would be through the arts, through law, through politics, and other means of media, and then we go on to the positive, where we offer the correction, or where we offer the Christian perspective on those topics. And when we're talking culture, we're talking everything that affects culture. We are talking medicine, healthcare, law, economics, sociology, military. We say that our Christian worldview has something positive to say about every aspect of life. Now, it's not to say that it gives this definitive, hard, rigid, prescriptive, in the sense of, for example, a counter worldview would be the Muslim worldview that sees itself as having to dictate authoritative, from an authoritarian point of view, that they have to conquest and conquer in order to be good, right Muslims. The Christian worldview is such that a Christian can be a faithful believer and operate under virtually any political system, because what we trust in is the gospel. And as we mentioned last week, we Christians have developed over the years a just war theory, where if there is such an injustice and such a violence against humanity, that there may be a time and a need to take up arms to try to defend those that can't defend themselves. And in cases like that, Christians have found a very strong motivation to take up arms and go to their defense. But we're going to back up to the Roman age. And at the beginning of the church, it's very interesting, because the church came into birth with no power. They had no power, no authority. They were very persecuted. And the way in which they expressed their faith and lived their life in the context of that culture is very interesting, could be very informative to us because we find a lot of parallels living in America that's very similar to the Roman age. And I just want to highlight a couple things. There definitely was a threat of authoritarian government. And the reason this was brought in was to sort of control a sense of chaos. There was a lot of chaos going on within the Roman Empire, and so the state had to get bigger and bigger and assume more and more control in order to harness in a lot of that chaos. And so we see the influence of Rome in all of Western culture, from Europe all the way to America. This is something that's obvious. So the civilization of Rome tried to build its ethics and morality on military might, public opinion, and then emperor opinion. So it went through those stages as the Roman Empire had developed over time. After that, they pretty much had turned to their plethora of gods. I think a lot of us are familiar with Zeus, Jupiter, and all those that it was very similar to the Greek culture that they turned to their god. Well, the problem with that was they weren't really big enough and they weren't permanent enough, as Schaeffer said. They were just amplified humanity. And so they weren't big enough in order to give them a full worldview to handle the trials of life.
And I want to hit on that because I think that's crucial, Landon, when we talk about that, because that means when you say a God that's not big enough, that means, well, there's no real ultimate answer. There's no real ultimate authority that can give us ultimate answers to these questions that we have. So that really ends up being the problem there when you don't have a God, as Schaeffer said, that's big enough.
That's exactly right, yeah. And the people actually willingly accepted divine leadership from the Caesars in order to bring peace and prosperity. Because they were unable to settle it amongst themselves, they willingly relinquished to Caesar authority in order to bring that peace and affluence. Now, Christians during that time period, of course, most people know that they were killed. And one of the reasons they were killed was they submitted to the one true God, and they didn't submit to Caesar. Although they were model citizens, as was pointed out with the earlier debates from individuals such as Justin Martyr and others, as they were put on trial giving a defense for the Christians in their empire. And that was part of their defense is, hey, you know, we're pretty good citizens. We drive our chariots under the speed limit. We pay our taxes. You know, we do things the way we ought to do here, and there's no reason for us to be persecuted. But here's a key point, Eric, and this has been brought up by several individuals. Of course, Schaeffer here. Another great book is Gene Edward Veith's Modern Fascism, where he shows this is why Nazi Germany was threatened by the Jews, amongst others. Authoritative governments are threatened by a group of people that appeal to a higher authority. Even if they are model citizens and they serve no genuine threat to the empire, which the early Christians did not, they still serve a threat ideologically to an authority because they want total submission. And that longing for control and power, when they know there's a group of people that have a higher authority than themselves, they seek to persecute it. And that's exactly what Rome did to the early Christians. So the church was built on a revealed spoken word that could handle the weight of life because it came from the one true God. Now, an authoritarian state, as I said before, it just cannot tolerate a group of people that live with another absolute. So the people, this is the citizens in Rome now, they were given to a heavy thirst for violence and sensual gratification, which had to be neutralized by a bigger government. Now what this led to an apathy and a decadence, so to speak. Things such as painting, art, music, it became more decadent, bombastic. As the people became more affluent and as they became more enticed by entertainment, when I had visited Rome before, we took a tour of the Colosseum, and the tour guide said that on an average during the day, they would sit in the Colosseum and watch gladiator events for 6 hours a day.
Wow.
Now, I know
6 hours a day.
6 hours a day, 7 days a week, that which at the time even it held something around 60,000 people, the big Roman Colosseum. I had heard statistics. Now, this was 10 years ago. Obviously, media consumption has changed, but the average American citizen had watched 5 hours of television a day. So there was an immediate correlation there between what Rome did and where America is today. It's very fascinating. So for them to consume in a live event, that much violence over and over again, it began to desensitize them. And of course, it's pretty famous. They're giving over to phallus cults, their sensual obsession, and in order to stimulate the people or all the citizens within the empire, this led to a horrible economy because nobody wanted to work.
Yeah.
So the state had to come in and force labor at that point. There was even one example was the government was actually binding farmers to their land and mandating a certain amount of production of crops because nobody really wanted to work. There was no motivation to work at this point. It was a heavy inflation. It was heavy authoritative at this point. The government was trying to dictate and control everything. The people were in chaos, and all they wanted to do was gratify their senses, and the only thing to fill that gap was a huge empire. Well, what happens when the trials of life come upon a people, a culture, and something's got to give.
Yeah.
And Schaeffer gives a wonderful example of what's called the Roman bridge. And he's standing on a bridge that was built during the Roman Empire over 2,000 years ago. And he says, if you take a horse and chariot and come over this bridge, it'll hold. But if I tried to take a modern-day 18-wheeler and drive over this bridge, it'll collapse. There's a limit to the pressure that this bridge can handle. And that's his analogy he uses for a worldview, is their worldview based on Caesar authoritarian control could not handle the pressures of life, and the Roman Empire collapsed from within. And that had a lot to do with it was, even though that Christianity became the official religion of the Roman state, the citizenry in and of itself was still addicted to these sensual passions and things of the like. And it had already been set in motion. There wasn't a whole lot by the time you get into the middle of the 4th century that the Christian worldview could do in order to fix the things that had been set in motion for hundreds of years.
Now, Landon, to me, of course, I resonate with this when you say, in a sense, we are living like they lived in Rome. We are getting to that stage. When you view this, do you think it's happening faster than it did back then because of the ability with the media and the things like that today? Are we following it's definitely a similar pattern, but are we doing that just at a faster rate today?
I think Al Mohler has said on publicly, he does a daily news feed called The Briefing. He has said several times in terms of things such as same-sex marriage and those types of social issues that he's never seen anything move as fast as it has the way in America, that there's been such a drastic cultural shift in something as socially relevant as marriage. And
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right, Eric. And those that are very gifted and have their finger on the pulse of culture and see where things are going, I think they're able to identify that. And it is moving at a very fast pace that way. It certainly is.
Another great resource, if you want to check it out, Tony Perkins runs the Family Research Council, frc.org, and I was just interviewing him just a few minutes ago, and he said it is amazing how quick things are going. If the Supreme Court changes the definition of marriage, it's going to be going even faster. Things are going to happen so quickly. We're going to blink and it's going to be here. And so all that to say, hey, we need to educate ourselves. We need to continue to be involved. We need to pray for those in leadership. He said he prays almost every day for our president to make wiser decisions. He says we need a lot more people that aren't just praying over a meal, but are literally earnestly fasting and praying, because throughout history, we haven't seen cultures turn around from the cultural cycle that happens. It's called the life cycle of a nation, and we'll look here at a few more points. But as Rome went through this cycle, so through the centuries, other nations have gone through this cycle where we get apathetic, which is where we're kind of at now, and that leads to bondage. And bondage, it crushes people until there is a spiritual awakening. And when we're living in a day today, when I talk to major ministry leaders, I talked to Joel Richards yesterday, who writes on Islam. He said, Islam, the people of Islam, Muslims, know more about the Bible than most Christians know. He said, atheists know more about the Bible than most Christians know. And he's right. Now, they're not educating themselves for the right purpose, but we don't have a generation, we don't have a culture that understands the how and the why of the function of the Bible. And that really has led to, well, it's led to what we're seeing today.
And I think the benefit that the Christian brings to the marketplace of ideas is the fact that the reason that we care so much about marriage, again, a lot of the criticisms are thrown at the Christian consensus and the Christian voice that why do you want to get into everybody's bedroom? And it really has nothing to do with what anybody does in the privacy of their home. We can really functionally operate in a society with people that have differing worldviews. But the reason we care is that we care about the sanctity of marriage because we believe that what God has prescribed is genuinely beneficial to everybody. And protecting that institution of marriage is a benefit, and we have a voice for that for a reason. We genuinely believe that it is unhealthy to engage in a homosexual lifestyle consistently. And we only say that because we care. Now, when you're talking about giving somebody the freedom to do something is one thing, but to make something legal and then force the acceptance of that of everybody else, that's a radical move there. And there is a reason that we stand against it. And what we're seeing here, Eric, again, I think as Al Mohler has put it, is we're seeing the fight for sensual freedom versus the fight for religious freedom. That's pretty much where we're at right now in the culture, and this is where we're kind of seeing this friction take place, is which view is going to win out in a sense. And maybe something short of a revival will be the only thing to kind of hedge this off a little bit, but we earnestly are concerned for people. Now, I will apologize for Christians that are just loud and obnoxious and throw rocks as though they're holier than everybody else, and it should not come with that kind of sentiment. It should come with a sense of compassion and understanding and listening to what other people have to say. It's not to say that other legal issues, such as if you're in a hospital and you want anybody to be able to come into the room, there's legal restrictions because of they're not allowed to get married, so only the mother becomes the right to be able to speak to a particular situation. Well, those things can be adjusted legally. It doesn't mean you have to completely uproot the entire institution of marriage in order to. So I want to listen to that. I want to hear that complaint. I may not agree with what you want to do with marriage, but I do agree with that complaint. And I think most Christians would be happy to go into the courts and mitigate that kind of thing. But this is what we're talking about in getting into the culture and the exchange of ideas of with other worldviews. We can live with other worldviews. We don't have to have this dominating foot on the throat of people that way. We just earnestly desire what's best for the culture because we know it comes from a God of holiness and a God of mercy and love, and what He prescribes is always best for us.
And that is so true. I mean, how many times in our lives do we find ourselves banging on the wall when you're a teenager and you just are sick and tired of the rules and you just want to go break the rules? And when we stop and turn around, though, it'd be like me hitting this wall right here next to me and going, why can't I get out of here? But when I turn around and look, it's like, look at all the freedom that I have inside the safety of these walls. The walls are there for my safety. They're not there to block me from something good. They're to keep me from something bad. And that's the lie of Satan, is to tell you that God's rules are there to keep you from something good. Satan tempted Eve, and Eve thought she was missing out on something that was good, and she found out she was missing out on bad, and she should have stayed inside the walls that God had placed there. So, man, this whole thing on specifically marriage, Landon, since you bring that one up, the way they are arguing against it, for gay marriage, you're right. Every single thing they're talking about, there's an easy way to say, hey, here's a way we can address that without changing the definition of marriage, which shows me this isn't about a partner being able to come into a hospital room. That's not really what this is about. This is literally about trying to undermine what I consider to be the fabric of society. And even when we look down through history, we see the family unit, the family structure, a mom and a dad together, are the ones that that really it is the fabric of society. If you haven't looked up on Twitter, Ryan Anderson, at Ryan Anderson, he's doing a great job of making arguments from a cultural perspective of if we're looking for what's best for society, we should not adopt and change the name, change the definition of marriage. That's not best for society, and he argues at it from that perspective.
And I will even add to that, there was a research professor from the University of Washington that had chronicled really marriage started going downhill when a lot of Christians began to look at their views of divorce in a rather loose manner. This thing's been going on really since the 50s and 60s, and it was the high divorce rates. Now those could have various causes and things like that. I'm not going to unpack all that here, but in general, we kind of missed the boat even back then to be able to sort of speak to marriage. However, we're not going to say two wrongs make a right. Just because heterosexual couples get divorced at a massive rate, it doesn't mean that we need to completely overturn the entire institution. And we're seeing some gross examples of this redefinition. We've got several cases in America right now of fathers wanting to marry their daughters. There was an example of a mother wanting to marry her daughter. They're really, and of course polygamy. I think everybody saw that one coming. Anybody that didn't think that that was on the horizon was simply had their head in the sand. Once we begin to open up the redefinition of marriage, there's going to be nothing to stop the court cases from pushing anything. Eric, it sounds funny, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody doesn't try to marry their pet someday, genuinely.
I believe you're exactly right. That idea, that concept is definitely coming because soon as you open the door, it's Pandora's box, if you will. As soon as you open that door to, well, it could be a man and a man or a woman and a woman. Well, then it could be, a man and a little baby girl. It could be a woman and a baby boy. It could be anything you want now if we are determining what marriage is. And that's why, as we said in the Roman culture, we're kind of in a similar place where the gods weren't big enough. There was nobody saying, here's what's right, here's what's wrong, you need to do what is right. Landon, I forgot to tell anybody who's watching live with us, if you go to the Google Hangout, if you're on our YouTube page or on the Creation Today website, you can actually go to the Google Hangout, and there's a Q&A app in the upper right-hand corner. Feel free to ask a question via Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer that while we're talking here for the next few minutes. Okay, so Roman culture went through this. We saw that life cycle. We saw what happened in the Roman culture, and we saw what happened to society. And you're right, Christians can live in any single type of environment. I mean, we're looking at what's happening now, even with children that are being literally killed because they will not renounce Yeshua and accept Allah as God. They say no, they won't do that, and this is happening right now today. Young children are being killed for their faith. We know the adults are, and now they know the children are as well. This is literally happening, and I don't know how quickly it will come to America, but I believe it will come.
Yeah, it very well could. I mean, the persecution has certainly happened at different levels. We're seeing a very aggressive secular movement to try to use the courts to silence any opposing view or any type of religious freedom that may interact or spill over into culture in some way. They've changed freedom of religion to freedom of worship, and that shifty language is to basically push everything into a particular building or chapel on Sunday morning, and it better not spill out into anything else. That's where they're trying to put the cap on and pressure that. And much like the early Roman Church, Eric, it may be in God's providence that we have to endure some trial. We've been very blessed for several years. We've started several orphanages, hospitals, a lot of missions work all over the world because of our freedom and our affluence. And it may just be our time to go through some trial. And, who knows? But as Os Guinness just wrote in his last book, we hold out hope for the gospel. We hold out hope for that, first of all, that God would bring a renewal to this nation. And we can have hope to correct this.
Amen to that, man. I've got a lot of people coming in here, so Landon, I'm going to let you start going down the
okay.
Middle Ages and things like that on some other views. I'm going to mute my mic for just a second.
Okay. Well, and what we're going to do, we're not going to hit each and every point that Schaeffer does in the How Should We Then Live. We're going to go ahead and jump to the scientific age, simply because that's something that's a lot more relevant to our time period. It marked the real intellectual shift right around the 17th, 18th century of what when we talked about in philosophical apologetics, empiricism, and things of the like. We're kind of in this age now, and in America, in the West, along with other competing religious ideas, whether that be this militant version of Islam, whether it be kind of this melting pot of New Age spiritism. We're finding in a lot of polls that people are considering themselves spiritual but not religious. And underneath all of that is this very strong, aggressive, sort of secular, very atheistic, naturalistic movement, particularly in the academy. And so what we deal with when we deal with the scientific age is we're finding man putting his trust in reason. And that's really, we've been swimming in that pool since, again, the 17th century, and we're really taking it in now to think that we can construct, again, a full comprehensive worldview and a social culture based on man and his reasoning, as though we can handle the pressures of life. And the 20th century, being the bloodiest century in the history of the world, ought to give credence that this kind of utopianism that is promised by this purely secular, industrial, modernistic type of worldview ought to show the very collapse of that. It simply does not work. Obviously, the socialist revolution in Germany, the communist revolutions in Russia and China, it's nothing but spilling blood in the streets in order to bring in those ideologies. Whereas examples of England and others, through simple proclamation of the truth, can bring a peaceful revolution, is one of the greatest examples of history that a peaceful revolution can be brought about because of a consensus that God in fact has spoken. We have a source with which we can draw from, and based on that source we can kind of accommodate our lives. And we do believe that. As believers, we believe that the Christian worldview has something to say about science. We're not silent on that. We're not backwards. I know, Eric, you've spoken a lot of times of a lot of Christian scientists that's made great contributions in our culture.
Yeah, and that to me really is a huge thing. The fact that modern science was born out of a Christian worldview, and it wanted to study the order from the designer. It wanted to study how God created. And so really the idea of finding out why this does that and how this solar system works and things like that really was born out of Christianity. So here you see the beginning of all the scientists going, hey, I want to study God's creation. I want to understand what He's saying about His world and how He developed it, the how, and they already knew why. They knew He did it for His glory. Now how? Let's figure this out. And so really all of modern science, when I think of Bacon, Pascal, Kepler, Boyle, Newton, Faraday, I mean, all these guys were looking for the design in nature, and that's exactly what they found, and I believe that's why God blessed them with such amazing, what we now look back at as scientific discoveries as they codified this information.
And I think as long as the secular scientific worldview continues to take prominence, their actual end goal is to simply reduce all of humankind to mere machines.
Yeah.
And at that point, there's ultimately no value. They've lost all value, because at that point, now how do you gauge the value of an individual's life? Things such as abortion, which is obviously a discrimination to a particular group of humans. You have euthanasia, where now your value is based purely in economic terms. You no longer have any kind of value as a person or a human. When these things get redefined as pure mechanical versions, it's not going to handle the pressures of life. As the pressures of life mount up and culture gets more and more pressure put upon it, and they begin to try to decide who deserves to live and who doesn't, it's going to be purely on mechanical means. The Christian worldview says every human has value and dignity because they were created by God. Whether you're handicapped, elderly, infant, it doesn't matter. We want to do all we can to preserve that life because you're made in the image of God and you have value.
And during the what we call or calling or referring to as the scientific age, when it comes down to man is just a machine, this really does create a problem, because now the group of people that works the best for. If man is just a machine, that works great for men ages 18 to 25 years old. Man, when you're in your prime, I mean, that works great for a military-style leadership of, hey, we're just a machine. Well, then, hey, we're going to rule because we're the strongest. But you're right. As soon as you lose productivity, or if you're not intellectually able to add very much to society, well, now you as a machine are no longer needed, because you're not viewed as in the image of God. You're viewed as just this blob of tissues. That's really all you're seen as.
And it's different for somebody to try to place value on themselves. We hear a lot of secular pushback in debates and things as they try to account for value in life, in the sense that they're valuable just because they're human. Well, we've seen that doesn't carry weight very long. That doesn't go very far. And even if you, as an individual, try to place value within yourself, it doesn't mean everybody else acknowledges it. It doesn't mean everybody else has to acknowledge it. So then you get into a might makes right. Who's the strongest only the strongest has a right to survive at that point. And so we would be doing humanity, evolution, the culture, justice if we eliminated a lot of these weaker, inferior type of humans, however you gauge that. There is actually within secular movement to look at religious-minded people as weak and inferior and need to be eliminated so that humanity can somehow progress. Well, we ask the obvious question as we speak, with a word from a word from eternity. What's that going to matter when you die? What is any of that going to matter when the individual dies? You're talking about the continuation of the human species just for the sake of the continuation of the human species. Offers no basis for life whatsoever. It's completely empty and void, and I think as Christians we can call that bluff. You don't have anything to live for. Anything whatsoever to live for. Your life is ultimately meaningless. You're an accident on a mud ball that happens to be just far enough from the sun to generate life, but the universe doesn't care. Nothing cares. It wouldn't matter if you left tomorrow. Unless God exists. That puts a whole new category on everything. Now, everything you do and every moment you're alive has eternal weight and eternal significance because God has given it eternal weight and significance. And you can find purpose and redemption in Christ Him crucified as an example of God offering His mercy and love to all of us who have sinned against Him.
It's interesting. Every time I talk to what I would call an intellectually honest atheist that would admit that, Landon, and say, you know what, you're right. You're absolutely right. My worldview says life is meaningless. When I see them admit that, I go, if I were you, I would accept Christianity just on that very basis alone, that, hey, you guys actually have meaning. You have a reason for existence. You have a purpose for living.
I think so. You just want me to go? Okay, yeah, I think Eric's computer locked up. But that's one of the benefits that we try to bring as Christians to the table of ideas, is we don't have, or we don't desire to have, a short-sighted worldview that way. We really want a fully comprehensive worldview that speaks in all areas of culture. Now, we haven't talked about it much here because we've kind of moved through the time periods of Western civilization, but even things like the arts, we take a strong conviction that the Christian worldview can motivate a strong sense of contribution to the arts. You look back to the examples such as the music of Bach. His entire compositions were derived from the conviction that every single note had purpose and meaning and significance. He was always writing variation, but yet always with resolution. That was his worldview that guided his composing of that style of music. And there's a reason that it's written the way that it is, and it carries the depth and the beauty that it carries. And so one of the things that we want to do as believers is also listen to other worldviews through their arts. What type of music do some of the other worldviews produce? What are the sounds? What is the lyrical content? What is the message that they're trying to say? Because we believe that out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth does speak, and that when an individual artist sits down and writes a song and he writes his notes and his music, that he is expressing his worldview. Whether he's intentional about it or not, that definitely comes out and it plays a part. And we hold the conviction as part of the doctrine of vocation that if an individual is gifted in art, music, film, any of those types of areas, that they can serve their neighbor, they can actually love their neighbor by serving them with that gifting. And it can be a betterment for all of culture that we take that Christian influence and that Christ-centered influence into the world of the arts and can actually produce good art. It doesn't always happen sometimes, but the very basis of it is that we feel as though we can make a good contribution that way. And we take a spirit of excellence to everything we do because we genuinely believe that we're serving God that way. And so not just in the area of science that Eric had mentioned, where they were, the earlier scientists were coming with a conviction, how do we better understand God? How do we better understand Him? Well, we're going to look at His book of nature and try to understand His creation. Whereas it seems opposing secular worldviews may approach science as they're actually trying to understand themselves. They're making nature the end-all be-all. And you're not going to find the purpose or the meaning of life, honestly, looking through some type of microscope watching cells bounce off each other. You're just not going to get anything from that. However, if God, in fact, has come into our midst in the person of Jesus of Nazareth and can tell us what our function and purpose in life is, what God is working out, and how we can be reconciled unto Him, that gives us that eternal purpose and gives us a foundation with which we can make an impact. And so what we encourage is, as we spoke in legal apologetics several weeks back, if you have a particular mind that is drawn toward the law and legal and things of that nature, then by all means, enter the workforce as a lawyer. It's great to take the Christian conviction to the area of law, to try to help laws, to try to defend justice, to try to defend goodness, and use the courts to do so. There's a lot of cases out that need that type of defense. If you are gifted in music, as we mentioned earlier, take that gifting to the marketplace of ideas and utilize that gift for the betterment of your fellow man and to the glory of God. If you're to be a politician, there's several wonderful Christian men that's trying to serve in Washington right now with that conviction, with the support of their constituents, operating by those principles. They try to make that impact. This is what we're saying. It affects every area of life in terms of economics. Some great books. I think Jay Richards wrote one called God, Money, and Greed is a really good book on kind of a Christian view of economics. R.C. Sproul Jr. also wrote a book called Biblical Economics. Both of those are really good resources to help understand the conviction of work, of labor, of equity, of profit, the utilization of that more freedom is better for the individual in terms of economics. It's not to say that things like greed can't stain a particular endeavor, but ultimately if a Christian enters the marketplace with that conviction that to utilize money as simply a tool in order to better serve humanity, then that economic freedom is better. Eric, are you back, buddy?
Hey, man. Well, I had to use my cell phone. I'm not sure what happened to the laptop. It's not working anymore. But if you can hear me, all right? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, very cool. Well, I don't know where you left off in the notes, so I'll let you keep going, and I'll jump in whenever I can.
Okay. We have a question from the Q&A. The name of Francis Schaeffer's book is How Should We Then Live? I had referenced it earlier in the podcast here, and that's the name of the book. Now, he wrote several books, but one of the reasons that I utilize Francis Schaeffer so much, particularly in the area of cultural apologetics, is because he was so good at it. He had such a wonderful ability to observe the culture and see the consequences of that. He was able to, for example, look at film, look at art, listen to music. He was very poignant back in his day to take, for example, some of the musical compositions of John Cage. And it's very chaotic, it's very bombastic. Well, he was discerning a worldview from that. John Cage was representing a worldview that represented chaos, and it was coming out of that. And so that's why we utilize this material so much. I was telling a friend of mine, Eric, earlier yesterday that Francis Schaeffer, actually as early as the 70s, was writing about the Christian conviction on ecology and environmentalism well before it was trendy to do so, that the Christians need to take a stewardship over the earth. I mean, he was writing about this way back then, that we need to really consider exactly our cause and effects, and take a higher calling of our stewardship of the planet, what God has commissioned us to do. That's just one of the examples. He was obviously right with the curve, or ahead of the curve, on things like abortion and euthanasia, and what enabled him to do that was his biblical understanding of the value of human life. He saw what the culture was doing, minimizing, devaluing the individual as a mere chemical composition, having no worth, no value, and he was speaking to that. The reason the culture could devalue infants and the elderly was because they had devalued all of humanity as just nothing but mere machines. And so the Christian consensus speaks against that, as we have consistently. I cited in our historical apologetics, I believe it was Tertullian was speaking against abortion during the time of the Romans, as they were killing their infants out of convenience and other reasons. And the Christians, even back then, were talking about life beginning in the womb. So this is something new. It isn't like we just invented this. It's just the pervasive problem of abortion is relevant, and it's caused us to speak against it.
Wow. If you can still hear me, man,
yeah,
great points. And Francis Schaeffer really was hitting the nail on the head. I remember I took a friend to see a movie that came out about a month and a half ago, and I just asked him afterwards. It was actually he and his wife, and my wife and I went together, and afterwards I said, "What did you think?" He's like, "That was weird." I said, "Let me tell you what happened. They were actually preaching a philosophy. They were trying to teach a religion inside of this movie." The movie was called Lucy, and the basic idea is that through drugs, this person was able to enhance their brain activity, and their brain activity, there was such an overdose of drugs, their brain activity went to the point where they became one with the universe. And now their job, their mission, if you will, in life, their purpose is to pass their information on to the next generation. And at the end of the day, that is their entire purpose, to pass this information, what we've learned, on to the next generation. And even with that, and Landon, maybe you want to hit this, even with that I go, well, can't I poke a hole in that pretty easy? Why should I pass information on to the next generation? Why should I care about survival? Why should I care about knowledge? It makes us more comfortable. Why should I care about comfort? But what gives meaning and purpose to life? By the way, I like being on a cell phone instead. Look at this. I can walk around, look around the ballroom.
Yeah.
Big giant room here, man.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, yeah, I think you're right, and that was one of the things in Lucy, and I think there was some hidden kind of Buddhism there, as the as the main character Lucy was kind of in this sort of stoic type of even keel personality. She never got too angry. She never got too sad. Her emotions never fluctuated. It was just this very steady, calm kind of drifting. And they had alluded to ancient knowledge in the movie, so there's probably an appeal that the Buddha had actually unlocked something as far as the key to existence and everything. But I think you're right, and that's a prime example, Eric, of how we as Christians can, when we go to film and we watch the movies, we put our grid up and we ask the question, what worldview is being presented? Because every form of art is a worldview. And it is going to tell us something. They are trying to give us a message. Even if it's the most slapstick, goofy comedy, there's still a worldview that's being presented to us. And I think as Christians, instead of being scared and running from it, we can jump in, snatch it, look at it, kind of observe it, and hand it back and say, oh, yes, this is exactly what you're trying to teach us.
Now, I
And
know when it comes to the class that we're going to do in August, I know that you do that a lot. We'll bring in a lot of videos and actually not necessarily watch whole movies, but a lot of video clips and say, okay, let's examine what worldview this is coming from. Give us a couple just off the cuff. Let's talk about some of the ways to do as you're looking at a worldview, or excuse me, at a culture, whether that's a painting, whether that's a movie, whether that's the way somebody runs something. Let's talk about that and figure out, okay, how do we determine what worldview they're coming from?
yeah, and I think that's in the realm of painting and art, it's a little bit tougher because there's so much interpretation and that whole avant-garde thing. I'm nowhere near skilled to be able to try to discern that. But I think most of us, as the example that I've given in the past, is I'll ask a class, how many people have read Origin of the Species? There's always a couple that raise their hand, and then I ask, has anybody seen a Jurassic Park? And everybody raises their hand. So everybody's learned evolution, basically.
Yeah.
Through some type of movie, through some type of, that's how the worldviews are getting expressed, because that's kind of the easiest to deal with. And so as Christians, what we're looking for is, we're trying to learn, how are they answering the origin, meaning, morality, destiny? Are these questions sort of inundated in this, and how are they being addressed, and how are they being answered? And some writers, directors, I think of, for example, a Woody Allen, is he pastes his worldview on thick. It's really undeniable to watch one of those movies and not pick up on it. Others are a lot more subtle. I think was it James Cameron that did the Avatar? It may not be as heavily pasted on there, but as you watch it, you can obviously see something's trying to be told there. Something about getting connected with nature. If we get too far ahead of nature, not necessarily God and His creation, but if we get too far ahead of nature, if we lose that connection to nature, we're going to cause this disconnect and this rift, and it's going to cause a battle between nature and ourselves. These are just some of the types of worldviews that are kind of expressed through the art. A great Christian example, Eric, is one of the obvious ones that's been made into films, which would be Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is where men were gifted in the realm of being able to write fiction and fictional literature to draw within that a worldview analysis of that. We don't have to necessarily paste it in this didactic, formal, rigid. We can use the arts as well. We see examples of this as even Jesus speaking of parables in order to get a point across. We have room as Christians in the realm of the arts to utilize things like poetry, storytelling, and the like in order to convey that message. When you watch music, especially nowadays with, well, pretty much since the invention of MTV, now musicians are sort of finding the liberty to give you the images along with the music itself. So it's not just the arrangement of notes and what sound they're trying to convey to go with the lyrical content, but now they're giving you images to accommodate that. And so again, you're receiving in that a worldview.
You know, and all this, to me, goes to point. I mean, here I am at the National Religious Broadcasters event here in Nashville, Tennessee, and they have several films that they're previewing here and showing, and there's a lot of different filmmakers, and there are more and more Christian studios popping up saying, hey, we want to teach how to creatively do this, how to do film, how to get the Christian worldview out into the arts. And I say, yes, it's about time, because I feel like we fell behind. We really withdrew from Hollywood and said, you know what, forget it, let's get out of there. There's a bunch of wicked people there. There's wicked people all over. And rather than withdrawing, we need to, I don't know if infiltrate's the right word, but we need to literally get in there, invade, and become a part. I mean, look at what is happening around the globe today with Islam and what the Muslims are doing. They are letting their worldview, which they don't separate their worldview from their life. I mean, it is one thing. It's an entire system. It's an entire way of living. But they are letting that infiltrate just simply by sheer numbers, going in and change things. There are places here in America where they practice Sharia law because they're just getting in there and making that worldview take over. But when it comes to the arts, I think, yes, definitely, we should be the leaders. We shouldn't be the followers. We should be the leaders when it comes to presenting the arts and presenting the Christian message inside of those.
And I'll give a kind of a prop to, especially in the realm of music, I think Christians have gotten a lot better in music over the last several years, particularly in a lot of the urban settings with hip hop and rap. There's a lot of really intelligent guys out there that are just so good at the way that they craft their lyrics, the way that they can tell stories. Shy Lynn is one example. All the guys that was in Deep Space 5, LA Symphony, some of the old rappers, the Percussions, Lightheaded. These guys, the way that they even crafted this sort of jazzy sound, it had a little bit of depth to it. And in today's world, it seems as though the music that comes out is very simplistic, very repetitive. It has no depth. It doesn't require much thought. And there is where Christians are making a positive influence. The other areas, whether it be indie rock or metal, again, these are areas that Christians have found a lot more liberty to engage in, and there really are genuine good musicians out there, and they're using their gifts for that. And I'm very thankful for it. I know I was a part of it.
Landon, you're starting to... Can you hear me? Can you hear me or no?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you're starting to sound like you're wanting to be a white rapper there, bro. Is that what's... You like music, don't you? You really do enjoy music.
I do. I kind of consider myself a little bit of a music snob, somewhat, because I think it is. It's a vital part of life. I think it's a wonderful tool that can be used. I appreciate good musicianship, and even if it's a secular band or a secular worldview that I don't really agree with as far as their worldview, I can appreciate how talented they are, and I can appreciate the hard work they go through, whether it be just the art of the album covers, how they structure the album, the lyrical content, the note arrangement, odd time signatures, all those types of things. I truly enjoy that a lot, and I kind of asked the question, man, I want Christian versions of that. I want Christians to be as good as that, to take a high honor and be able to engage the culture that way. And I'm thankful for it. I'm genuinely thankful for it. I'm glad that those guys. I saw my share of rap shows back in the day when I was younger.
I've never been to one, man.
One of the coolest things I seen was this rapper called Red Cloud. He went down and freestyled. He told everybody in the front row to pull something out of their pocket and held it up, and he did a freestyle all the way down the stage, just picking stuff up and rapping off of it. It was one of the coolest things, man. He was very talented. Wow. I loved him a lot. But yeah, I mean, that's been going on for quite a while, and I say, Lord bless them, Lord encourage them, and I encourage all other Christians and believers, man, support them. If you want to buy good music with a good message, that's a good way to do it.
And I was going to say, some of the people out there are going to say, hang on, we shouldn't support a rapper going in there and doing that. And I go, okay, are you supporting those that are reaching people with the music that you like, with the music that you approve of? Are you doing something to get involved in the culture? I haven't bought much rap music. I don't know if I've ever bought it. I don't think I've ever bought any rap music. But I'm, Christian or otherwise, and I'm going, hey, but what about the stuff that I do appreciate, that I love, that I think is good? Am I actually engaging? Am I integrating my worldview into the culture that I'm in today? So that's one of the reasons that I'm actually here at the NRB, is because I want to meet people and talk to people about this project that God has given us to work on. We're working on a movie project called the Genesis 3D movie, and I'm excited about this thing, man. This is going to be a really, really cool project, and I think it has the opportunity to put on a candlestick the light of God's Word and the message in Genesis, which leads straight to the cross. Remember, in week number 1, we talked about historical apologetics, and we said that historical apologetics takes people, or should, people to the cross. The whole is to get them to understand the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as we've gone through literally these last 7 weeks of apologetics, talking about historical apologetics, scientific, philosophical, legal, cultural, the problem of evil, all these different things, you got to remember the whole point is to be able to take people intellectually and logically and take them right to the cross of Christ. So, Landon, let's wrap up this. Sorry, I don't have access to the Q&A app anymore, but let's wrap up this this last session with kind of a, how do we go from the culture, from the world like Jesus did. He did a great job of transitioning from the world to the need for a Savior, to who he was. He was Christ. What's
And
up?
I got a text from a friend of mine, Trey, a little earlier today, Eric, and he had said that, or at least the text had said, apologetics is not that we're defending God. You know, God doesn't need defending, but people need help understanding.
Mm.
And that's kind of the goal of apologetics. Is what we want to do is, number one, is strengthen and encourage those that are believers. If your shield of faith has some holes in it that is kind of littered with doubt, we want to patch those things up, and we want to help you find assurance. The
Mm.
second layer of that is in an evangelistic approach, that we would help the non-believer understand what we believe and why we believe it. And so, as we've laid the foundation to kind of get to this point, the cultural apologetics point is the last point. We've shored up our foundations in every area of life with, you know, philosophy, with science, with ethics, law, and everything. And now we're up to the culture, which has within it politics and the arts. The reason that we're able to move to this level is our foundation has now been laid. And we use our gifting as a vocation to serve our neighbor and to serve God with that, and we use that as opportunities to love them and to serve them, but also as an opportunity to proclaim the mercy and love of God through Christ Him crucified.
Amen to that, man. Well, as Christians, let's be engaged and let's get involved. Let's make sure that our worldview affects our culture, and be that politics, like you were saying, Landon, or the arts. Let's make sure and get out there and be a part of it. Don't withdraw from culture. Engage culture. I still believe that Christians could once again lead the way when it comes to thinking. You look at what happened in the 1900s. Throughout the 1900s, philosophy had really been taken over by a lot of atheists. And so the whole field of philosophy, the major teachers in it and things like that, were atheistic. And then God brings up Alvin Plantinga in the 1960s and just absolutely takes over philosophy for the truth of Christianity and the truth of God and who He is. And Alvin Plantinga is able to just do some amazing things. God has used him in some amazing ways. You mentioned earlier Al Mohler. There are guys that are doing amazing things, standing on the truth of Christianity and engaging our culture. I just talked to Tony Perkins doing the same thing with the Family Research Council. So you don't have to be a full-time apologist to engage your culture. Engaging your culture might look like sitting down with your kids and talking to them. Engaging your culture might be talking to somebody at the coffee pot and asking them how their week was and what they do this weekend and what did they think about that movie that they went to see. And hey, showing them what that worldview, what that movie was trying to teach, what the worldview of that movie actually was. So your influence in the culture is going to look different than other people's, but by all means engage and let's influence this culture with the truth of Christianity and the truth of Jesus Christ.
Let me insert a quick commercial here, Eric, to kind of, since this is our last episode and we're on the back end of it, what we want to do in August, as much as anything, is give believers the tools with which to build an apologetic library to work from. And what we mean by that is we don't expect everybody to have a 150 IQ and commit everything we're going to give them to memory. But what we want to do is we're going to give you a workbook that we're going to work through during that week period. And what that's meant to do is to be a reference for you to take with you. It's just as a tool to give you a good foundation to build from as you go through life and the pressures of life come upon you, that you can find resources to help get answers. You're never going to have every answer to every question you're ever going to be answered. But there's good ways to get resources and answers to those questions. And if your vocation is a school teacher, a mechanic, a shipyard worker, whatever the case may be, you can still do that vocation and feel as though you're serving your man and serving God that way. But we just want to give you some tools with which you can utilize in order to answer questions that may come about. So the reason that we're posting the book list,
Amen to that.
Is so that when you come to the class of apologetics, you have some familiarity. We're not going to be starting at absolute ground zero and sort of spoon feeding you all the way up. Apologetics takes some commitment. It takes some work, but your faith is important to you. It's always a work. We're always learning. We're always growing. And so we just want you to be a little bit familiar when you get here. That way we can give you this workbook and some other tools with which to build up from. Watch these episodes. Watch all 7 of them. This will give you some good background knowledge of what we're going to talk about. And if budget is tight, we understand that money's tight, particularly for college students, which we would love to come out. That's what we're kind of aiming for, is if you're in college and you're getting intellectually pressured by professors, we want to give you tools to sort of fight back. And if you can just find debates on YouTube that address those different categories, we'd love to give you some resources to help you find some of those debates. Sometimes that helps out a lot. It gives you a little bit of understanding of where the other side's coming from, and it helps you see the Christians defend that perspective. So spend the next several months, if you're planning on coming out, man, we'd love to have you come out, but spend the next several months getting ready for it. And, you know, we promise we'll do the best we can to give you some great tools with which to take with you.
From you as we've gone through these apologetics and gone through, really I know there's a lot of the facts, there's a lot of the information, but it's equipping people. And so I've certainly appreciated this. So thanks for being a part of this, man.
No, thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure. It's one of the things I love to do, man. I genuinely enjoy it.
Awesome. All right, well, we'll look forward to seeing you guys in August. If you missed any of these episodes, you can go to creationtoday.org. Creation Today and check them out and really equip yourself to defend the faith. I want to thank you guys for joining us. We've certainly had a great time despite all the technical difficulties on some of these Google Hangouts with my travel schedule throughout this time. But thank you again for paying attention, learning, and ultimately I guess my goal is I want you to be able to, in your mind, understand God's Word and God's world and how those two come together so that you can be an effective witness for Christ. Keep studying and serve God. God bless.